Oh, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the launch of our Family Living Wage for Manitoba 2020 update. I'm Lynn Fernandez, and I'm here with co-author Jesse Hager, and who we put this report together. And I'd also like to thank Michael Apta, who helped Jesse with the calculations. Michael's not here, but Lynn and Jesse will be taking you through the launch today. I need to start, of course, by letting you know that we are broadcasting from Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Deni's peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Unfortunately, Indigenous peoples are overrepresented amongst those who are on minimum wage or who are low-paid workers, and so our report today goes a long way to set a new standard for what it takes to pay a living wage so people can have their basic needs met. I'd like to thank the Winnipeg Foundation and the Assiniboine Credit Union for funding this research. And please note that this Zoom meeting is being recorded and it's being broadcast to CCPA Manitoba's YouTube channel using the speaker view, so you yourself are not being recorded. We will have time definitely for questions and discussion at the end, so please post your questions in the chat, and you can find the button for that at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to go through some of the background information and set the stage a bit for us before Jesse goes through the calculations and explains how things have changed. We've got some kind of very interesting changes this time. And then after Jesse goes through the changes, I'm going to just give you some closing comments. The term living wage is used by many, but here at CCPA, we calculate the living wage using the Living Wage Canada methodology, which is part of the Canadian Living Wage Framework. And you can find, if you want more information about that framework, it's in the, there'll be a link in the report. Now, the framework provides a consistent living wage definition, a calculation methodology, and strategy for recognizing corporate and community members who commit to pass a living wage policy. It's important to remember that this is not a legislative minimum wage, this is a voluntary initiative. The BC office of the CCPA developed and maintains the methodology, helping communities across the country with their calculations. As I said, the living wage differs from the minimum wage because it's based on the actual cost of living of a two-parent family with 2 children. And according to the 2016 census, almost 66% of families with children in Manitoba are headed by couples, and close to 21% of families with children are single-parent families. So we do calculate the living wage for a one-parent family as well. Now, it's obviously not possible for employers to base their wages on family types, so we always promote the two-parent, two-child wage as the benchmark for all employers. We provide the single-parent information to remind policymakers how much some families have to struggle and to encourage government to think about policies and programs that support parents and children. So as you can see by this slide, the living wage is calculated as the hourly rate at which a household can meet its basic needs in the community in which it lives, once government transfers have been considered. And those transfers can be the Canada Child Benefit and government deductions like taxes and CPP. The living wage is a complicated calculation of wages, provincial and federal government programs, and living expenses in 10 categories. So if we could go ahead to the 10 categories now. Oh, sorry, I missed this slide. It's based on the principle that full-time work should provide families with a basic level of economic security and not keep them in poverty. And it is the family living wage that we concentrate on is the amount needed for a family of 4 with 2 parents working full-time to pay for necessities, support the healthy development of their children, escape financial stress, and participate in the social and civic and cultural lives of their communities. And as you're going to see, and Jesse will break down the numbers, but the living wage for 2020 in Winnipeg for our family is $16.15 an hour. It's $14.19 an hour in Brandon and $14.27 an hour in Thompson. So if we could look at the family characteristics, did you want to go over the characteristics, Jesse? Sure. Sorry, that one that the following slide, Jesse. Thank you. So our 2-parent, 2-child family, we have gender. The parents are 1 female, 1 male, and in the single parent, we have a female parent. Ages of the parents 25 to 44. Number of adults in paid work for our 2-parent family. Both parents are working. Obviously, just the one in the single family is working. Each adult is working 35 hours a week. The hourly wage is equal for both of them, and there are in the 2-parent, 2-child family we've got a boy age 7 and a girl aged 4, and in the single parent family we've got a girl aged 4. So those are the characteristics that we took into consideration. And then the next slide, please, Jesse. And as you can see, this is really a bare bones budget. We're not giving them any luxuries. The way it's worked out in our calculations, I won't go over all these numbers in detail because Jesse's going to talk about them, but we look at how much the family needs. That this is the 2-parent, 2-child family, how much they need for food every month, clothing and footwear, shelter, transportation, childcare, the private health insurance, because we want to make sure that kids can go to the dentist and things like that. Parents' education, part-time education, obviously, a contingency fund for emergencies, and other household expenditures such as internet, cleaning supplies, and things like that. Other provinces will have a 10th category for the provincial health care charge, which obviously we don't have in Manitoba. That's paid for by general revenue. So what it doesn't cover, and I think this is just as important a list as what it does cover, it doesn't cover credit card loan or any other kind of interest payments. It doesn't cover saving for retirement, and we know that that's a huge problem when people are not saving enough for their retirement. It doesn't allow the family to buy a home. It doesn't allow for any savings for children's future education. They're only allowed minimal recreation, entertainment, or holiday costs. And importantly, also, it does not cover the cost of caring for a disabled or an ill or elderly family member. And it really doesn't give them much of a cushion for emergencies or tough times. So it allows the family to provide basic necessities so that they don't have to choose between rent or buying nutritious food or keeping the heat and lights on. And it allows children, say, to get glasses if they need it and go to the dentist. And importantly, the family to live in proper housing. And we'll see that is a really important component. So, Jesse, I think it's time to turn it over to you now to go through what the calculations for this update are. So, Jesse, take it away.
Thank you, Lynn. As Lynn mentioned, the Winnipeg Living Wage is $16.15 an hour for 2020. Now, this is up by $1.61 from $14.54 an hour in our last calculation of the living wage in 2016. Here we can see in this table monthly expenses and the percentage change in the monthly expenses. Overall, expenses went up by 12.5% from 2016. Compared to the inflation rate, this is much higher. So the overall inflation rate for the economy was only about 6.5% during the same period. We can see in this table, with respect to the monthly expenses, that the cost of key necessities, particularly shelter and food, increased more than the rate of inflation. And this is the case for a number of other categories as well. Shelter and food, however, are the largest expense categories for the living wage family. And so they're the most important when we're looking at this analysis. The shelter costs saw the highest increase. Median rents in Winnipeg increased by over 17%. That's just rent. Shelter has a little bit more in it in our category. But just looking at the rent, we saw rent increase by more than 2.5 times the overall rate of inflation in the economy. This cost the family an additional $2,716 per year. Our estimated food costs also increased significantly by over 15%, adding almost $1,500 in annual costs to our living wage family. The introduction of the Canada Child Benefit made a big difference for this family, as it did for all our families. The federal government enhanced the child benefit system under the new Liberal government in 2016. And our previous living wage calculation only had a half year of that new benefit built in. Even with the additional half year being counted and making the difference for our new calculation, we see big changes with respect to the amount of money that people receive for these child benefits. So this enhancement provides an additional $1,890 per year. That helps our living wage family offset the higher costs that I went over in the previous slide. Our living wage family, however, does not qualify for support from important provincial programs due to the low level of income at which families become ineligible. So as in 2016, this is still the case, the family does not qualify for the Manitoba Child Care Subsidy or the Manitoba Rent Assist benefit, which is an important income-tested benefit for low-income renters in Manitoba. Moving on to our single-parent living wage for Winnipeg. The living wage for this family, a one-parent, one-child family, went up from $17.40 an hour to $21.20. This is similar. Sorry, those numbers are reversed on the slide, but the new is $21.20. This is a 21.8% increase. And similar to the living wage family, the single parent family saw a large increase in their annual shelter benefits, so around $1,900, and their food expenses went up by over $1,000 per month. So these are increasing at a rate higher than the rate of inflation. So this large increase that's required in the living wage to meet their needs, the single parent family still sees an increase in the Canada Child Benefit of $485 due to the enhancements that I mentioned. But given the fact that their income has gone up, this family loses a bunch of their rent assist benefits. So they lose significantly over $2,000 in rent assist benefits compared to 2016. This speaks to the challenges that we've identified through research at the CCPA in with respect to rent assist benefits being too low and phasing out too soon for families. As in 2016, the single parent family does not receive the provincial child care subsidy. Their income is too high. In Brandon and Thompson, we have a different trend emerging. So the living wage in Brandon for 2020 is $14.19 an hour. And this is a decrease from $14.55 in 2016. So a small decrease, 36 cents, but a decrease nonetheless. So why is this happening? Well, the Brandon family faced some of the same cost increases as the Winnipeg family. These increases were much more modest. Particularly if we look at the shelter benefit, we only saw rents go up by $676 per year. So this is actually less than the overall rate of inflation in the economy. So this leads to a much smaller increase in the total expenses compared to the Winnipeg family. And then the child benefits now offset those increases in costs, and even more so provide the family with additional income over and above that. So that reduces our living wage slightly for the Brandon family. Our single parent family in Brandon sees a similar trend, but the living wage for that family actually goes down by quite a bit more. It goes down by $2.54 compared to 2016. And this decrease is, again, primarily due to the increase in the Canada Child Benefit and the family now qualifying for much more income under the Rent Assist program. The family now also qualifies for other enhanced programs through the changes at the federal government level. For example, the family qualifies for over $1,100 for the Canada Workers Benefit, which was also enhanced recently. The family now also qualifies for a modest provincial childcare subsidy, which they did not qualify for in 2016. In Thompson, we see the living wage coming down by about $1 compared to what it was in 2016. And here we have multiple factors at play here. We see an actual decrease in rents, not just inflation adjusted rents, but actual rents have gone down in Thompson for a 2-parent, 2-child family. That's based on the 3-bedroom apartment rate. So that fell by about $100 per month. So this combined with the much higher child benefits is what's driving this fall in the living wage for the Thompson family. Now, and we see a similar story here for the single parent family. Thanks to the higher benefit levels, the Thompson 1-child family sees the living wage fall to $14.93 in 2020. As in Brandon, this decrease in the living wage is due to the higher Canada Child Benefit, and then the family now qualifying for rent assist benefits. Similar to our other single parent family in Brandon, we saw this family now qualifying for the Canada Workers Benefit under the enhancements, which also makes a difference for this family. Due to an additional subsidy for Northern Manitoba, this family sees a fairly substantial provincial childcare subsidy of nearly $2,000. So that recaps the changes that have taken place over the last 4 years with the living wage. So what do these calculations tell us? What we see is that the cost of necessities, especially housing, has driven up the living wage in Winnipeg. The enhancements of federal programs, especially the child benefit programs, have made a big difference for all the families that we examine. This has mitigated the impact of higher costs in Winnipeg and has actually driven down the living wage in Brandon and Thompson. We also see that rent assist is a very important source of income for our single parent families. And with the child benefits bringing down the living wage, we really see those benefits being significant for these families. They're important before, they're even more important now. A final conclusion after looking at these numbers is that our child care subsidy program in Manitoba remains quite low and inaccessible for most of our sample families. Only the single parent in Thompson receives a sizable childcare subsidy based on the assumptions of the living wage analysis. That's it for me. I'm going to hand it back to Lynn to speak to a few other policy issues and related challenges with going forward in this context. You're on mute.
Of course, I had to do that once. I had to do it at least once. Sorry. I was saying, when I talk to employers about the living wage, they sometimes have a lot of trouble wrapping their heads around it. But it's important to remember that this is a combination of employer and government initiative. But first of all, the living wage is a call to public and private sector employers, and primarily the larger ones, to sustain families. Then this can be achieved through wages, or as we've seen through Jesse's calculations, a combination of wages and government programs, but also non-mandatory benefits, such as extended health benefits, subsidized childcare, subsidized transit passes, etc. So if an employee receives non-mandatory benefits, the hourly wage they need to be paid to reach the living wage will be reduced. So there's also a role there for those non-mandatory benefits that obviously vary from employer to employer. We have found across Canada that local governments are really leading the way. In 2010, the city of New Westminster became the first municipality in Canada to officially pass a living wage policy, and all direct and contracted staff, and that's important, not just the people who work for the city, but the contracted staff providing services on city premises, are now paid the Metro Vancouver living wage. And since then, 3 other BC local governments have taken steps to become living wage employers, the Hayuet First Nation, the City of Vancouver, and the City of Port Coquitlam. In January 2020, Kingston, Ontario adopted a living wage policy for all its full-time employees and will be looking at living wage provisions in their procurement policies. So advocates there in that area will keep pushing council to adopt a full-fledged living wage policy, which would include all contractors. So sometimes employers will go up in steps. They won't necessarily go full-fledged, but they will take it in steps. And that, I mean, that's better than nothing, and we encourage that as well. It really is time for Manitoba municipalities to step up to the plate and implement a living wage policy for their own workers and companies that they contract out to. If cities were to lead the way, we feel that other employers would follow the example. But once again, I want to reiterate, it's not just about employers. The labor market alone cannot solve all problems of poverty and social exclusion. Our standard of living is a combination of pay, income supports, and accessible public services that reduce the cost for families. So, you know, direct government transfers can put money into the pockets of low-income families, as Jesse's has explained. And the more generous these transfers are, the less a family requires in wages to achieve a decent quality of life. And the introduction of the Canada Child Benefit has been huge, and it shows just how big an impact government transfers can have, with our Brandon and Thompson families' living wages decreasing largely as a result of the Canada Child Benefit. Jesse has explained that rent assist is also making a big difference for our single parent families and some support in Winnipeg, but other government transfers and subsidies are reduced or eliminated once a family reaches an income level well below the living wage. So the government really needs to be taking a closer look at that. And there are examples in our report which explain how some of those benefits are decreased too much and too soon. So the living wage is also affected by indirect government transfers in the form of public services and infrastructure that shift certain costs of the shoulders off individual families. Things like affordable housing, universal affordable childcare, national pharmacare or dental coverage for children and modest income families, and policies ensuring paid sick leave, which is of course very important these days, are other examples of government actions that would significantly moderate the living wage and would ease the role of employers ensuring that families can meet their core budgetary needs. And this is particularly important for smaller organizations that struggle, to keep their wages up. The largest expenditure in the living wage, as Jesse has explained, is the cost of housing, and all levels of government, not just provincial, need to urgently address the shortage of adequate and affordable housing for low-income families. And that would include also making sure that there's enough social housing available, not just improving the rent assist program. So the role that employers can play, who are struggling with how they can manage this, is to also reduce and to advocate for progressive policy changes to increase government benefits to low-income earners and enhance those crucial public services that improve the quality of life for all families. And this is particularly true for the single parent families, as we have seen in the analysis. The last issue that I want to deal with is this idea of a living wage in the time of COVID-19. And critics may wonder if the middle of a pandemic is the time when we should be trying to implement a living wage, and especially with small businesses trying to stay afloat, and those service sector employers that tend to pay lower wages. And the response is a bit complex, I guess. First of all, of course, it's important to remember that higher disposable income for wage earners will play an important role in economic recovery, which is going to be crucial as we come out of the pandemic. So the degree to which employers and government collaborate on a living wage strategy is crucial. Government investment in new and renewed social services as a part of a just recovery can also support living wages. And the best example I can think of would be a publicly funded and regulated childcare system, which would create decent jobs, allow parents to keep working, and lower family expenses, and also help us deal with the she recession, in which so many women have not been able to stay in the labor market because they don't have access to childcare. Providing more publicly funded services also reduces the living wage, as I explained, and that presents a perfect opportunity for government to make a big difference for workers and employers. Measures taken to reduce poverty today will help mitigate expensive problems exacerbated by COVID-19, such as sickness and poor educational outcomes. Finally, in a time of slow economic growth, or in a time when we need to figure out how to stimulate the economy, it's particularly important that public sector employers, such as municipalities and school boards, health authorities and universities, and financially healthy private sector companies, and we need to remember that some companies are doing very well in COVID, that they seek to sustain and enhance the earnings of low-income families. Boosting the earnings of these households is one of the most effective ways of stimulating the local economy, because as we know, lower income families tend to spend almost all their income in the communities. So that wraps it up for Jesse and I, and now we would like to open it up to any comments and questions that you have. There's it is a complicated report, so I'm anticipating there could be some questions. So please feel free.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm going to host the questions here. It's Molly McCracken. I'm the Manitoba Director at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this Zoom presentation. We're also broadcasting live to YouTube, and this will be archived there. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives is a charitable, nonpartisan research institute, and we have hosted the methodology for the living wage for quite some time now. I also want to take a moment to give a special thank you to Michael Apata, who's a PhD student in economics, who did the number crunching for this under Jesse's supervision. So I see you here. Thank you so much, Michael, for all your work on this report. So glad you could join us today. I also wanted to note, I did put the report in the chat, and we do have some infographics And I'll be sharing those on our social media after. So if you're able to retweet those or share them, that'd be great to get the word out further. We do have some media covering today and also later on in the day. So we're hoping to get the word out about this update today. So yeah, I'll just turn it over to the questions that we've got here in the chat and ask them to Jesse and Lynn. And then, yeah, please feel free to keep posting questions. We have at least another 20 minutes together. So the first question is from Jen Sikora. She says, besides negotiating for a higher salary for workers, what can unions do to help improve this situation? I don't know if you want to take that, Lynn, as the Arrow Black Chair on Labor Issues.
Sure. Of course, the other, we were talking about how important benefits are. So when a union is negotiating contracts on behalf of its members, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, of course, the benefits are a big portion of what they look at. So the more benefits that the union can negotiate on behalf of the members, particularly when it comes to things like extended health care or help with childcare, if such a thing. I don't know if any unions are doing that, but that would be extremely helpful. And I think what we've learned in COVID, that childcare is such an important part of a component of what workers are struggling with in this time, that if perhaps unions could start concentrating a bit more in their negotiations on seeing if employers would have the capacity to offer some sort of childcare for their employees, but also the unions need to be pushing, and I think they already do this, I'm sure they're well aware of this, is continuing to push the government to be providing these sorts of benefits for employees as well. It's really important to remember how what a difference the government programs can make, not just the ones that offer money, such as the child care benefit, the Canadian Child Benefit, but also things like pharmacare would be another huge advantage to workers that would eventually probably affect the living wage. So they just need to keep doing what they've probably always been doing, which is advocating and pushing for these things. But great question. Thanks,
Lynn. Next question is from Tegan Matalusik. Pardon me. Do you have any recommended approach for employers to estimate the living wage in years where CCPA has not completed a full calculation? For example, last released rate plus the rate of inflation. That's a good question. I'm going to give it to Jesse.
Okay, thanks for the question, Tegan. The short answer is there isn't really a great way to do it. The problem is, if you just adjust for inflation and costs, you're not taking into account changes in benefit levels. In many cases, those benefit levels are also adjusted for inflation. For example, the rent assist benefit is pegged to median market rents. So as median market rents in Winnipeg go up, if they use Winnipeg for the entire province, the rent assist benefit goes up over time. The Canada Child Benefit also increases every year with the cost of living. So in theory, you can have costs going up and benefits going up at the same rate. So then in that case, you would be in a position where they would balance out and the living wage would stay about the same. So that there's really no shortcut. I do believe we hope to proceed with more regular updates of the living wage in the future. We will also be posting our calculation spreadsheets. We also have prepared a detailed calculation guide that describes our process as to how we work through the nitty-gritty of these calculations. So if there are organizations out there who do want to update the numbers, the tools will be available for them to do that as well.
Thanks, Jesse, for that answer. Yes, we do plan on updating this more regularly than this 4-year gap, which was unfortunate, recognizing that you are interested in hearing it, which is great, and it is very important. Next question is from David. Is there a place for pressure or legislating some form of tax or fee for those businesses whose primary profits do not benefit the local economy in terms of big box, multinational, or online business? Which one of you would like to answer that one?
Well, maybe we both can chime in if Jesse has some ideas. I mean, that's a tough one. That's a political decision, right? And that's a decision that would have to be taken by politicians who, as we know, are extremely reluctant to increase taxes at any time. Although I do understand that in the last update from the Canadian government, they are talking about starting to look for ways to tax some of these bigger companies like Google and Amazon. It has, I think, started happening a bit more in Europe because Europe is kind of fed up with these companies extracting demanding so many public services and treating employees so badly, and then not paying any taxes. But this is just something that people are going to have to keep pushing and advocating for, and pushing politicians to start making those sorts of changes. It's a steep hill, but it's one that we have to keep trying to climb. Jesse, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, thanks, David. It's a really good question, and it's certainly an important policy discussion to be having in the current context. We talked about the challenges that businesses are facing in COVID-19, but not all businesses are facing equal challenges. We know, as you point out, that some businesses are actually profiting from the pandemic. We know that grocery retailers, for example, are they're picking up the business of having to feed people now that it's much harder to eat out, for example. And many other examples of businesses that are seeing their profits increase as opposed to decrease in the pandemic. There are some limitations based on international trade agreements and other forms of legislation that governments have passed in the interests of corporations that do make it quite difficult to discriminate against foreign or multinational corporations and give preferential treatment to local business. There are ways to support local business through training requirements and that sort of thing, or training supports, that are permitted under these trade agreements. But there's all these non-discrimination clauses built into these agreements, and there's a chance that governments who choose to try and favor local businesses and run afoul of these agreements, unfortunately, may end up paying severe penalties for it. So while there is an opportunity to look at an excess profit tax, for example, it would be challenging to target it only at non-local business.
Okay, great question, David. The next question's from Len Van Roon. He thanks Lynn for resources you sent previously. Could you comment on a road forward to address the lack of a living wage and reduced or non-existent benefits for so many precarious workers juggling multiple jobs to try and survive?
Sure. Hi, Len, and nice to communicate with you again. We've had a couple of emails. I could circle back to that other previous question about unions for one thing, because in addition to what I mentioned that unions could do, that's the other thing that they could be doing, is to be pushing employers with whom they have dealings to and that would cover the contract workers for the most part too, who often don't have access to the benefits to be paying a living wage. It's difficult, for unions to advocate or to push employers with whom they don't have contracts to be changing their benefits. But that's, I think, there's a larger capacity for unions to be more involved in social unionism, where they are encouraging society in general, if you will, and doing campaigns to explain to the public what it means when we don't have decent benefits for in employees. And this is something that we've seen, for example, with the paid sick leave, which has become such a big issue in COVID, and so many precariously employed people do not have any sick leave. And this has become a national conversation, and it's become a national conversation to a certain degree because of the advocacy work that the unions have done. So, unions need to continue educating their members and encouraging their members to get involved in this advocacy work. And we just have to keep pushing governments to be improving employment standards so that non-unionized and non-living wage employees have got decent benefits. And the paid sick leave has been a really good example of that.
Thanks, Lynn. Do you have anything to add, Jesse?
No, I think that captures it.
Mm-hmm. I have a question for you, Jesse, that I found really interesting in this, because I know you've done work previously on rent assist, and the two benefits that the two-parent families in all the cities, I believe, were not eligible for were subsidized childcare and rent assist. And I'm going to put in the chat a link to a report by Susan Prentice we released this fall about the problems with the childcare subsidy is not indexed to inflation, so less and less families are eligible for it every year. And also rent assist, which is available to renters in the private market. Can you comment on that issue in terms of rent assist and what would need to change with rent assist?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure, Molly. I think the key thing to remember is that we have two very different types of benefits out there with respect to this issue. On the one hand, we have the Canada Child Benefit, which is a benefit that is giving substantial amounts of funds to low-income families, like rent assist, but it phases out much slower than these benefits. So as you earn income, the amount that the government takes away is much smaller. What this does is it allows families a bit further up the income spectrum, and frankly, actually a fair ways up along the income spectrum, to continue to receive some benefits. With respect to rent assist and the Manitoba childcare subsidy, we have the opposite situation. We have the benefits phasing out very quickly as income increases. And as we've seen, that leads to many families who may just be making ends meet, not qualifying for any support under these programs. So that's a problem in itself. But it also has related problems with respect to promoting an effective economy, an effective system that helps those who need it. And I'm thinking in particular, if you're thinking about the amount of money you're going to lose in benefits when you engage in work, you look at rent assist, you look at the childcare subsidy, and if a family is trying to make that leap, for example, from just making it on social assistance and then wanting to go work at a minimum wage job, benefits like rent assist and the childcare benefit will stick with you for a while, but as you start to approach a living wage, those benefits just disappear. So one option to fix this problem is to extend that income range under which families can benefit from these programs. Make these programs accessible not just to those who are living in poverty, not just those who are really in dire situations, but to make these benefits available to families as they start to earn their way out of poverty through employment.
Okay, thanks, Jesse. That's great. I'm just going to also put in the chat the calculation guide that you referenced for those of you who are interested in the calculations for this update. This calculation guide was updated just for this release. So I don't see any more questions. Maybe I'll turn it back to you, Jesse and Lynn, for any final parting comments or thoughts.
I think I've kind of worn myself out here in terms of what I have to say. I think I want to thank Jesse and Michael for all their work on the calculations. It is extremely complicated. It's complex. If you take a look at the guide, you will see that there's many moving parts and levers, and it's an iterative process that is quite complicated. So thank you very much, Jesse and Michael, for taking us through this and for giving us these numbers. And I would just say again, this has been a particularly, I think, insightful release, because it really shows us so plainly the difference that things like the Canada Child Benefit make. And so it just really shows the importance of government programs. I think this has been clearer in this report than it has in others that we've done. So Jesse, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, I would close by saying a few things. First, I think it's very clear that the minimum wage in Manitoba is not even close to a living wage for any of the family types that we looked at. So that, I think, is an important policy issue to look at going forward. What is the purpose of the minimum wage? Should a person or a family who is working full-time at minimum wage be above the poverty line? Should they be able to meet their basic needs? My opinion is a strong yes. That should be a goal of the minimum wage, and we're very far from reaching that goal. I'd also like to highlight how this work is building on the work of others. The calculation guide, the methodology, it was all pioneered by the staff at the CCPA office in British Columbia with their colleagues. So we're standing on their shoulders, and it wouldn't have been possible without the work that they have done.
Great. Well, thank you so much to you, Jesse, to Lynn, and to Michael for this report. And thank you to all of you for joining us here today. We really appreciate it. And watch for information on social media, some shareables about this later today. So thank you so much. I should note we are launching the State of the Inner City report next week on Thursday, December 10th at 1 p.m. And that's about the impacts of COVID on community-based organizations in the inner city. So watch for that, and we'd love it if you could join us for that launch as well. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe out there. Bye-bye.